Right, so one of the biggest challenges that we hear from our customers is the buy versus build debate when it comes to new technologies. From your perspective, what are some of the key considerations that our customers should be considering when it comes to making a decision around that?
Yeah, buy versus build comes in two main considerations for me. You've got the technology side of it, and I think you've got the people side of it. And I think sometimes they're conflated, and I think sometimes they're just not recognised or considered at all. So what do I mean by that? So from a technology perspective, it's at its sort of most easy and component parts is there something that I can go out there and buy? So what we would refer to as COTS products. I appreciate some people don't actually know what COTS means. COTS, commercial off the shelf. So essentially, does it already exist and can I go and buy it? Or has become more prevalent, certainly in recent times. Is it something that I should go and build? I'll go and develop myself from the ground up, and then I have use of that technology as my IP, and we'll come to that in a second. I think the second part of it is people. So what I mean by people is you can buy a managed service provision. Then your MSP will look after your technology for you, or you can build an internal capability, an internal team, and have those people work for you inside of your own company. So I think those two often, do get kind of mixed up. I think the people one is the one that often gets forgotten. I think there's a number of reasons that people select whether or not they should buy or they should build, and then of course there's my opinion on whether or not that's right or wrong. As a general approach, and this is my opinion, and I think this is largely shared, is if something already exists, is there a good need to replicate it? If something performs 90, 95, 99% of what we functionally need, remembering that technology is an enabler. I don't need the tech, I need what it enables the outcome to be for my business or my public sector entity or whatever it is. There's no exact science to whether or not it's 9 out of 10 things that you need, or 99 out of 100 features that need to be ticked that mean that we're going to build it. We're going to buy it. We're going to take it off the shelf. But that's the sort of thing you're looking for. Does it predominantly do what I need? And again, I've got to kind of keep labouring that point that it enables the outcome. It is not. We're not buying the technology. I'm not looking for those features specifically. It's what it enables. If it doesn't, well then fair enough. That would be the time that I'd be looking to see, well, what is it going to take for me to be able to build this? You might have some very bespoke requirements depending on what type of business you are or what type of outcome you need. I've known historically public sector has some very specific things because it's quite niche. There are things that are specific to in the justice sector. They'll be specific to courts and how case management is handled, things in policing, how they handle documents, how they handle evidence, how they handle forensics. And so they might not be something that's just readily on the shelf because it's such a niche type offering. But I think that's where they kind of that confusion line tends to come with whether should I, shouldn't I. Now I think what we've seen in recent years as well is that there has been a greater prevalence to build because it is easier to achieve it. You don't have to go back that far before all of the wonderful things that we know that are available to us in the cloud and SaaS offerings and all of this good stuff. It just wasn't as easy to be able to build things. And I think there has been this prevalence to build sometimes when actually it should have been bought off the shelf. Another thing to consider is the total cost of ownership. So, you've got to factor in how long is this thing going to take to build? What's my manpower effort in building this? But it's also maintaining it, supporting it, and skilling the people around those teams. Because if they're specific teams of people who have built a very specific product, if they leave that business, they have walked out with the skills of something that, of course, is very bespoke. So the cost can actually become very prohibitive very quickly as well. You think the sorts of things that you can buy off the shelf, the sorts of major companies that you you might be buying your products from, they've probably poured millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars into R&D. You're unlikely to be doing that. So they are very naturally a long way ahead. So I always think that build is kind of should be very, very secondary, but we've seen more of it in recent years. I think there was a propensity to do it pre-COVID. I think when there was sort of the late 2010s, I think there was a lot of excitement around cloud. And of course, everyone wants to build, they want to go and do things. I get that, that's cool. It's a new set of things to work with, and it should be explored. Let's look at innovation and let's look at all that great stuff. But I think that has started to drop off a bit in recognizing that these things do start to become expensive, and they incur quite large tech debt. So I think it's then that consideration of say the skills that we've got in house. What does the market have to offer us so that we can continue to move with this product? But touching back on the managed service provider versus internal teams, I think that is a very important consideration as well. Is do we want to build internal teams to manage and maintain and look after pre-built technology? So you've got the kind of two different layers here, and there's lots of things to consider there as well. There's lots of benefits to having a managed service provider, lots of benefits to having things done in-house as well.
So just to pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned there, let's first start with private versus public. In your experience, is there a different approach across those two very broad sectors? Or, I know your experience spans both, which is why I asked the question. Do the public sector take a different approach to their counterparts in the private sector?
I think historically they have. I think it's pretty similar now. I think, and the reason I say historically is that with the advent of something like GDS, so Government Digital Services, which was set up quite a long time ago, government in the public sector was actually quite a way ahead of the game in the UK when it came to dealing with technical capability, technical products, the ability to build versus going and buying, and I think the private sector did lag behind, but I think that has leveled out, and I think that has become quite similar. Some of the private sector companies that we work with, particularly sort of FTSE 100, FTSE 250 type companies, I think they operate in a very similar way, certainly to central government in particular. I think really what you're seeing as well is you're seeing a lot of lessons learned. Cloud, when we talk about cloud, public cloud, it was only really kind of 2016 it started to sort of really grow and people started consuming it. That was when sort of Azure really came to the forefront. AWS had been around for a long time before that, but that was a kind of real kind of turning point. I think there was lots of mistakes made, and I think now 8 years later, a lot of those lessons have been learned, a lot of things have been understood. So yeah, I think it was imbalanced, and public sector were definitely way ahead, definitely doing more and probably building more. But I'd say now it's back to being pretty even.
Cool. So one of the things you mentioned there, and it kind of a bit of a recurring theme across a lot of these discussions, is the skills and capabilities that you need in-house, whether that be to build and launch the service or solution, or to maintain it, patch it, keep up with the maintenance of it. There's a Forbes report from late last year where the results surprised us a little bit in that networking disciplines, the skill shortage as such was a little bit lower than what we've seen in previous reports. We typically talk about there being a skills gap when it comes to networking, network security. Did that report take you by surprise a little bit? Is it in line with what you're seeing at the moment? And then thinking more broadly in terms of this build versus buy, how does that conclusion or that report affect what you were saying earlier?
Yeah, I don't think the report surprises me, but I think the report is wrong. In so much as that I think what people think is important, particularly around networks, is that's what I expected to see, because I don't think people understand which is of course always a fun one to talk about, because I'm naturally going to say I'm going to be quite defensive of that sort of networking discipline. But I try to be very rational with this thought as well. Is I still think there is a belief that the internet can be could deal with everything, can be the underlay. When people look at product, they're looking at SaaS products. SaaS products are typically going to sit on the internet. And so I think it's fallen to the back. And like with any kind of new, interesting, hype-driven technologies, I suspect that people will say that there's skill shortages in AI and machine learning and all of the things that are suddenly the next best thing in town, and that's probably true as well. But you don't have to go many years back before people were telling us that there was a huge shortage of skills in the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things has done what the Internet of Things has done. Blockchain, crypto, these were all the same. There was huge shortages, and then wasn't really demand, such as the basics of economics, that actually the supply wasn't actually that necessary anymore. So no, not really surprised by the outcome. I do think that this is going to become a bigger problem year after year after year. I think also networking is a funny one, because if we're talking about networking from a pure connectivity perspective, that's different to, say, cybersecurity. And the background I come from puts them in the same general arena. Yes, I appreciate they are completely different, but I put them in the networking sphere, very different disciplines, but within that. So I suspect that there will be cyber shortages and security shortages, which is totally right. So down at the most base connectivity, yeah, it probably is pretty low, and no one cares a great deal. But I think network automation and network as a service are going to grow quite exponentially, and the reality and realization will be that developers and the kind of people you've got pressing the buttons in cloud now are not network people. And as much as you simplify that down, they're still not network people. So I think that's going to grow over the next, I'd say, the next few years up to about 2030. I think you're going to see that grow slowly, but year on year, I'd expect that to grow. And yeah, we're then looking at the second half of your question, which was, does that sort of lead you to the buy versus build? What would you do? How would you do it? Well, I think there's a huge shortage of skills in the network space, and I think most of the people who do exist, who are from that background and know what they're doing, are almost certainly in network companies or network service provider type companies. And so I think if you believe that you can build something yourself, which I don't really see very often at all, or what I do see is that there's a desire to build in-house teams to be able to do these things, but often they're sort of filled with people who don't have comms backgrounds or understand what they're doing. I think that there are mistakes being made. And the mistakes that are made aren't just A doesn't connect to B, that's the kind of easy and more boring part of it. It comes back to things like security, and it comes back to cyber, and it comes back to where corners are cut, not necessarily maliciously, they're just not understood. That's where the greatest breaches come from, is not something that's put there by, with malicious intent. It was a mistake that was made because there was a lack of understanding. So I think for me, the way that this really has to move forward, and does at the same time, is that I think from that buy versus build, I think there is a need to buy services from network companies who do know what they're doing,